Hello, welcome back. Time for chapter 8. When we left off with chapter 7, we were hearing about all the feats that Maniac had performed in his first day at 2 Mills, and we left off with him hitting a home run bunt with a frog. And that upset John McNabb very much because he liked to have a perfect strikeout record. And that was where we left off. Okay, chapter 8. And that is how he came to be called Maniac. The town was buzzing, the schools were buzzing, hallways, lunchrooms, streets, playgrounds, East End and West End, buzzing about that new kid in town. The stranger kid, scraggly, carrying a book, flap-soled sneakers. The kid who intercepted Brian Dennehy's pass to hands down and punted it back longer than Dennehy himself ever threw it. The kid who rescued Arnold Jones from Finsterwald's backyard. The kid who tattooed giant John McNabb's fastball for half a dozen home runs, then circled the sacks on a bunted frog. Nobody knows who said it first, but somebody must have said, "Kid's got to be a maniac." And somebody else must have said, "Yeah, regular maniac." And somebody else, "Yeah." And that was it. Nobody, except Amanda Beale, had any other name for him. So pretty soon, when they wanted to talk about the new kid, that's what they called him, Maniac. And the legend has a name, but not an address. At least not an official one, with numbers. What he did have, where he did sleep, was the deer shed at the Elmwood Park Zoo. He slept there his first few nights in town. Whatever the deer ate, especially the carrots, apples, and day-old hamburger buns, he ate. Imagine how scary that would be. He's in a new town, and he doesn't have any place to stay. Imagine sleeping in the deer shed. He started reading Amanda Beale's book on his second day in town, and he finished it that same afternoon. Ordinarily, he would have returned it to her immediately, but he was so fascinated by the story of the Children's Crusade that he kept it, and he read it again the next day, and the next. When he wasn't reading, he was wandering. And when most people wander around, they walk. Not Maniac. Maniac Magee ran. Around town, around the nearby townships, always carrying the book and keeping it in perfect condition. This is what he was doing when his life, as it often seemed to do, took an unexpected turn. All right, take a second and think, what kind of turn do you think is going to happen? Let's think who he's met so far, where he is, kind of make a little prediction in your head there. Any ideas about what might happen next? All right, here we go, chapter 9. Let's see. John McNabb had never in his life met a kid that he couldn't strike out until that runt. Now, as he thought about it, he came to two conclusions. Number one, he couldn't stand having this blemish on his perfect record. And number two, if you beat a kid up, it's the same thing as striking him out. So McNabb and his pals went looking for the kid. They called themselves the Cobras. Nobody messed with them, at least nobody in the West End. The Cobras heard that the kid hung around the park and the tracks, and that's where they spotted him one Saturday afternoon, on the tracks by the path that ran from the Oriole Street dead end to the park. He was down by Red Hill and heading away from them, book in hand as usual. But the Cobras just stood there, stunned. "I don't believe it," one Cobra said. "Must be a trick," said another. "I heard about it," said another, "but I didn't believe it." It wasn't a trick. It was true. The kid was running on the rail. Remember when he left the Pickwells, they all looked out and couldn't believe it either. And if you've ever been near a railroad track and maybe tried to walk on the rail, you kind of did it like in a balancing way. Maniac was just running on the rail. McNabb scooped up a handful of track stones. He launched one. He snarled, "He's dead. Get him." By the time Maniac looked back, they were almost on him. He wobbled once, leapt from the rail to the ground, and took off. He was at the Oriole Street dead end, but his instinct said, no, not the street, too much open space there. So he stuck with the tracks. And coming into view above him was that house on Rayco Hill where he'd eaten spaghetti. Remember, the Pickwells. He could go there to that whistling mother, to the other kids, and be safe. The Cobras wouldn't follow him there, or would they? Stones clanked off the steel rails. He darted left, skirted around the dump, wove through the miniature mountain range of stone piles and into the trees, skiing on his heels down the steep bank and into the creek. Frogs plopping, No time to look for stepping rocks, just running. Yells behind him now, war whoops, stones still being thrown at him, pelting the water, stinging his back. Ah, the other side. Now he was through the trees and the picker bushes, past the armory jeeps, and onto the park boulevard, past the Italian restaurant on the corner, the bakery, screeching tires, row houses, streets, alleys, cars, porches, windows, faces, staring faces. The town whizzing past Maniac, a blur of faces, each face staring from its own window, each face in its own personal frame, its own house, its own address. Some place to be when there was no other place to be. How lucky to be a face staring out from a window. And then, could it be? The voices behind him were growing faint. He slowed, stopped, turned. They were lined up at the street a block back. They were still yelling and shaking their fists at him, but they weren't moving off the curb. And now they were laughing. Why were they laughing? Why do you think, guys? Why did they all of a sudden stop chasing him? They're still just standing there, yelling at him, but they stopped chasing him. Why do you think? Let's see. The Cobras were standing at Hector Street. Hector Street was the boundary between the East End and the West End, or to put it another way, between blacks and whites. Not that you never saw a white in the East End or a black in the West End. People did cross the line now and then, especially if they were adults and if it was daylight. But it was nighttime. But nighttime, forget it. And if you were a kid, day or night, forget it. Unless you had business on the other side, such as a sports team or school. But don't just be strolling along as if you belonged there, as if you weren't afraid, as if you didn't even notice that you were a different color from everybody around you. The Cobras were laughing because they figured that dumb, scraggly runt would get out of the East End in about as good shape as a bare big toe in a convention of snapping turtles. It's a pretty funny simile, isn't it? And I think it tells us that they think he's not going to get out of there without some trouble. So I think John McNabb and the Cobra gang thought, well, we didn't get to beat him up. That's okay. He'll get it. He'll get it over there in the East End. Okay, and the last chapter for today is what happens when he gets to the East End, chapter 10. Of course, Maniac didn't know any of that. He was simply glad they were done chasing him. So he turned and started walking to catch his breath. East Chestnut Street, East Marshall, Green Street, Arch Street. He'd been around here before, that first day, with the girl named Amanda. Other days jogging through, but this was Saturday, not a school day, and there was something different about the streets. What would be different on a Saturday? Kids all over. One of them jumped down from a front step and planted himself right in front of Maniac. Maniac had to jerk to a stop to keep from plowing into the kid. Even so, their noses were practically touching. Maniac blinked and stepped back. The kid stepped forward. Each time Maniac stepped back, the kid stepped forward. They traveled practically half a block that way. Finally, Maniac just turned and started walking. But the kid jumped around again and plunked himself right in front of him, face to face. He bit off a chunk of the candy bar that he was holding. "Where are you going?" he said. Candy bar flakes flew from his mouth. "I'm looking for Sycamore Street," said Maniac. "Do you know where it is?" Remember why Maniac would be going to Sycamore Street? Because that's where Amanda Beale told him she lived, and he has the book to return. "Yeah, I know where it is," said the kid. Maniac waited, but the kid said nothing more. "Well, do you think you could tell me where it is?" Maniac asked. Stone was softer than the kid's glare. "No." Maniac looked around. Other kids stopped playing, and they were just staring at him now. Someone called, "Do 'em, Mars, get 'em." Someone else, "Yeah, waste 'em." The kid, as you probably guessed by now, was none other than Mars Bar Thompson. Mars Bar heard the calls, and his stone glare got harder. Then suddenly he stopped glaring. Suddenly he was smiling at the kid. He held up his candy bar an inch from Maniac's lips. "Want a bite?" Maniac couldn't figure this kid out. You sure?" "Yeah, go ahead. Take a bite." Maniac shrugged, took the Mars bar, bit off a chunk, and handed it back. "Thanks." Dead silence along the street. The kid had done the unthinkable. He had chomped on one of Mars's own bars. Not only that, But white kids just didn't put their mouths where black kids had theirs, be it soda bottles, spoons, or candy bars. And the kid hadn't even gone for the unused end. He had chomped right over Mars Bar's own bite marks. Mars Bars was confused. Who was this kid? What was this kid? As usual, when Mars Bar got confused, he got mad. He thumped Maniac in the chest. You think you bad or something? Maniac was now twice as confused as Mars Bar, and he blinked. Huh? You think you come down here and be bad? That what you think? Mars Bar was practically shouting now. No, Maniac said. I don't think I'm bad. Not saying I'm an angel either. Not even real good. Somewhere in between, I guess. Okay, I think we noticed that the kids are having some trouble communicating here. When Mars Bar said, you think you're bad, obviously he was talking in slang, like, do you think you're tough? And Maniac, he doesn't really have any friends. He doesn't hang around with kids. He doesn't know about that. He just says, well, not real bad, not real good either, just regular. Mars Bar jammed his arms downward and stuck out his chin, and he sneered, well, am I bad? Maniac was befuddled. I don't know. 1 minute you're yelling at me. The next minute you're giving me a bite of your candy bar. The chin jutted out more. Tell me I'm bad. Maniac didn't answer. Flies stopped buzzing. I said, tell me I'm bad. Maniac blinked, shrugged, sighed. It's none of my business. If you're bad, let your mother or father tell you. Now it was Mars Bar doing the blinking, stepping back, trying to sort things out. After a while, he looked down. What's that? Before Maniac could answer, a book. Mars Bar had snatched the book out of Maniac's hand. This ain't yours, he said. He flipped through some pages. Looks like mine. Uh-oh. It's somebody else's, Maniac said. It's mine, I'm keeping it. With rattlesnake speed, Maniac snatched the book back, except for one page, which stayed ripped in Mars Bar's hand. Give me that page, said Maniac. Mars Bar grinned. Take it, fish belly. Silence. Eyes. The flies were waiting. Suddenly, neither kid could see the other because a broom came down like a straw curtain between their faces, and a voice said, I'll take it. It was a lady from the nearest house, out to sweep off her steps. She lowered the broom, but kept it between them. Better yet, she said to Mars Bar, just give it back to him. Mars Bar glared up at her. There was not an 11-year-old in the East End who could stand up to Mars Bar's glare. In the West End, even high schoolers were known to crumble under the glare. To old ladies on both sides of Hector Street, it was all but fatal. And when Mars Bar stepped off the curb and combined the glare with his super slow dip stride slump shuffle walk, well, it was said he could back up traffic all the way to Bridgeport while he took 10 minutes to cross the street. But not this time. This time, Mars Bar was up against an East End lady in her prime, and she was matching his glare eyeball for eyeball. And when it was over, only one glare was left standing, and it wasn't Mars Bar's. Mars Bar handed back the torn page, but not before he crumpled it up into a ball. The broom pushed him away, turned him around, and swept him up the street. The lady looked down at Maniac. A little of the glare lingered in her eyes. You better get on, boy, she said. Go where you belong. I can't be following you around. I got things to do. Maniac just stood there a minute. There was something he felt like doing, and maybe would have, but the lady turned and went back inside her house and shut the door. So he walked away. What do you think he felt like doing? I think maybe he felt like saying thank you to her for stopping that conflict between him and Mars Bar. But now, when we pick up next, we'll have to see what happens when he lets Amanda Beale know that a page of her book is ripped. All right, I hope you enjoyed the first 10 chapters. It only gets better from here, guys. See you later.